All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome. Puff class number 17. Excuse me. Week 2, day 1. Today, I'm going to be continuing to engage with John Rieder's Colonialism and the Emergence of Science Fiction. Then, if I have time, I'm going to move on to maybe something like Isabelle Stengers' Cosmopolitics. Goal today is to try to draw connections between the politics and of culture, shadow of capital essays that I read last week, the postcolonial slash Marxist theorists that I read over the course of the ending of last quarter, leading into my reading year. A lot of for my last project in Dr. Lloyd's class, I just worked on an annotated bibliography for some key texts. People like Arjun Appadurai's Modernity at Large, Edward Said's Orientalism, Reflections of an Exile, the collected essays, Spivak's Selected Subaltern Studies, stuff like that, Chakraborty's Provincializing Europe, Partha Chatterjee's Nationalist Thought, trying to draw connections between what I read in Politics of Culture and Shadow of Capital, as well as those post-colonial Marxist readings, and John Rieder's Colonialism and the Emergence of Science Fiction. Definitely starting to see how a lot of this stuff, where like the imbricated layers start to touch, where the overlap happens. Appadurai has this idea of like migratory, of these kind of mass migrations and technological advancement creates like all of these different like scapes, these imbricated scapes. Said's idea of the exilic condition, how that is informed by Appadurai's ideas of space, how Partha Chatterjee's ideas of nationalism configure this like diasporic identity. They're all related. They're all connected to each other. I'm interested in seeing how these kinds of with Politics of Culture and the Shadow of Capital is really talking about like transnational aspects, how different differences in local situated instantiations of neoliberal global capitalism produce different local situated versions of resistance against it. Very interesting stuff. Anyways, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So, yes, thank you for being here. We're going to go ahead and today we're going to be focusing on, again, John Rieder's Colonialism and the Emergence of Science Fiction. We're going to be using Zotero. If I have stuff and I'm reading it, if it's not my book, I don't really make notes in it and stuff. I just like take annotations after the fact. When it's a book that's a PDF in my Zotero, it's still going to be annotated, but I can take like more PDF oriented like notes and stuff, because I don't have to give the book back to anybody or anything. All right, let's go ahead and get started. And as always, Okay, so that was great. Rieder does a really great job of doing a lot of like clear and interesting textual analysis, and it reads like a very clear, almost encyclopedic breakdown of just how emergent science fiction texts in Victorian era Anglophone spaces is very apparently dealing with issues of colonialism. The first chapter, he, like, the way that he breaks the chapter's interiority down structure-wise is really useful for getting an idea for where his argument is going at each stage. What is going on here? It is... Okay, there we go. Sometimes it takes a second for the pages to load up. I'm just going to let it like hang out for a second and see if it decides that it's time. Oh wow, it's like all blank for some reason. That's not weird at all. What the heck? Where did it go? I can see like all of... Okay, there. That's so weird. You know what? I'm not even going to bother to go back through it. This is so confusing. It just looks like all the pages went like blank white. But anyways, he does a really good job. Like in this chapter, he's talking specifically, he breaks it down into like a who, where, I'm sure like a what, when, why, how is also going to appear as like subheadings throughout. But he talks about the relationship between facts, like factual truth, and the development of science fiction, and how science fiction doesn't exist. Like science fiction is defined by its capacity for like imaginative plausibility, while also kind of navigating the dialectical contention between, you know, developing ideas of a radical future, but also, you know, being careful, like the tension between thinking of a radical future, but also exoticizing the spectacular in order to create wish fulfillment. So that seems to be the large contention that exists in emergent science fiction. Excuse me. We're talking about like Victorian era stuff, H.G. Wells, things like this. But he's not just a Victorian, but he's specifically talking like Western Anglophone, in that tension between, you know, radical future, we need to imagine things, but we're exoticizing the spectacular in order to create like a wish fulfillment, and that's something that in colonial context is very problematic and fraught with issues. One of the things he talks about is like in this section, the who is the dislocated subject. So he's talking about how the key text here is Edgar Allan Poe's The Facts in the Case of M. Valdemar, and talking, or also in conjunction with Edwin Abbott's Flatland, talking about how, you know, in these texts you have, where's the note I have, dislocated subjects who can no longer occupy the epistemological position that holds conventional reality in place. There's also the where he talks about generic borders and the permutations of analogy, how imaginary others form is dictated by external logic. The impossible starts to look like science fiction when outrageous analogy crosses from the ludicrous to the plausible, and when these kinds of when the narrator of the science fiction utopia becomes the transformed, dislocated subject of impossible knowledge, this is where that dichotomy starts being produced with regards to ideas of borders, and like, I don't know, like one of the things he's talking about is the difference between two characters in this particular text by who is it? John Macmillan Brown's Rialaro, the Archipelago of Exiles, and Limanora, the Island of Progress. And he says in Limanora, there's these two characters. One is a guy named, I think, Cavor, who is interested in, who like develops an ethnographic study for like the people that are discovered, the speculative peoples that are discovered in the novel. And Brown is a character who has like, oh wait, hold on one second. Yeah, so is that right? Yeah, so Cavor has, Cavor and Bedford, not Brown. So Cavor is like, oh, I want, he's like documenting descriptions of like mutilated Selenites is like the group that they find, children, but it produces like a shock of recognition because he's realizing the savageness of earthly civilization, because he's willing to admit that he's in a position of the ignorant outsider trying to understand the inner logic of a complex society. But this other dude, the journalist Bedford, he's like telling an adventure story. And when you're telling the adventure story, you're telling the colonial voyage story. And within this adventure story, it's being set, the fantasies of appropriation are being set in opposition to disinterested attempts to understand a foreign other. And I think what Rieder is saying is that like science fiction from the beginning had these implicit tensions between colonialism and its subjugative effects. And he's very good at bringing up all the different ways that these texts that have been around for a really long time illustrate this kind of this relationship to coloniality, and sometimes in ways that are super obvious, but in others that maybe are less so. Like one of the things he talks about is the when. So he says the who, the dislocated subject, the where, the permutations of analogy and generic borders. When you're talking about, so he goes in the who, the where, the when. He talks about the nature culture opposition, and time travel. So he's like time travel stories. The very idea of messing with time, going back in time, forward in time, wherever, like playing around with temporality, creates scientific and ideological reasons. He says here, both for scientific and ideological reasons, then the problems of interpretation that confront time travelers are entangled with Western understanding of non-Western cultures and constitute one more way that colonialism is woven into the texture of early science fiction. As early as texts like Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, when you hear Marlowe say like, in the same way you might think of inhabitants on planet Mars, we're wanderers on a prehistoric Earth. By definition, they're creating like a disconnection and unreality where we're in like the weird place, which means our place is the normal place and this is the strange other place. And the time travel plot, Rieder says, is an excellent vehicle for exploring the nature-culture opposition, because the isolation of the traveler and the instantaneous or discontinuous mode of travel itself tend to heighten the usual difficulties of the stranger in a strange land. So these it's like in Time Traveler, where what does he say? Like in time travel, before time travel, people would, like time traveler characters would like fall into a trance or like a deep sleep, like Rip Van Winkle and shit, and then they'd wake up in a different time. But with time travel, it continues this kind of like fucked up location and temporality and stuff, and produces these contradictory forms between the Western self and the non-Western other. Specifically in that there's this implication that you know, like one of the things he says here, the subversive implications of Darwinian science, because it's like very ethnocentric and anthropocentric ideology to say, like, the reason it's strange when you do the time travel thing is because it's wild to us to think that anything remotely resembling humanity would ever be found on another planet, which emphasizes the peculiar and unique combination of circumstances that produces any given species. But like progressive teleology, it's weird. It's very, very weird. Like, I don't even know what to. Let's see, there's a section here on page 79 where the superiority of the cosmopolitan visitor. This is one of the things that I'm trying to get around, is like, how can we develop an idea of cosmopolitical understanding using Indian American, like not Indian American, but like Indian Anglophone speculative fiction? How does it help us to kind of negotiate into being a non-Western cosmopolitics, or not even a non-Western, but like a hybrid liminal, like migratory cosmopolitics, one that doesn't produce a subject politically that is like a superior visitor from the future or something, or some other place, but emphasizes the peculiar. Yeah, I don't know. This is interesting. Subversive in relation, ridicules is when. Oh, okay. This is what's. No, okay. I misread that. That's interesting. So in the text, this is Grant Allen's The British in John. Yeah, and Grant Allen's The British Barbarians. Rieder says that the author is able to talk about subversive implications of Darwinian science. So it's like, hey, you could do social Darwinism, where you ridicule the notion anything remotely resembling humanity could ever be found on another planet. Or you take it a step further and you say, well, actually, it wouldn't resemble humanity at all, because it would be peculiar and unique combination of circumstances that would occur in order to produce the given species of that planet. It would not be anything like us. But it's interesting. Very, very interesting. But and so it's really useful to strip away progressive teleology. I don't know, this is very interesting. It says, unfortunately, the stripping away of any hint of progressive teleology from nature seems quite forgotten in the realm of culture. Stripping away. So it's been forgotten in the realm of culture that we need to strip away hints of progressive teleology. That's smart. It's like, you can't say this caused this to happen to this, and that's why it would happen that way somewhere else. That's teleological. And maybe that's certain cultural formulations can be teleological as well. Sure. Okay. Anyways, that was definitely more than 5 minutes. Let's, again, haven't been taking a lot of long breaks, so if it happens and I forget, like, it's okay, All right, let's go ahead, another 25 minutes. Let's go. Come up here? Come on up. Come on up. Oh. Excuse me. Ah. Okay, 5-minute break. Let's see. That was interesting as well. Rieder is what's up? You out here? Okay, love you. See you there. Okay, so chapter 3, dramas of interpretation, was doing the job of what continues to do what Rieder is attempting to do throughout the entire text, which is demonstrate how early science fiction articulates structures of knowledge and power provided by colonialism. In chapter, let's see, maybe it'll load this time when I go back for a little pre-look. Some key points that I have, because I have my annotations and my critical ones. So interesting questions he's concerned with is, how does science fiction organize the play of the fantastic and the critical? Let's see. The emergence of science fiction is a long, winding path from certain narratives that, if I can even go there. Oh, okay, great. They carefully disrupt realist conventions in the mid to late 19th century to ones that assume science fiction conventions in the 30s. So science fiction as this web of interconnectivity, that's what defines it as a genre. Discussing tropes and aspects of it, like new forms of locomotion, both epistemologically and like technologically, encounters with lost races, the, satire and quest romance in imaginary voyages. Let's see. So, first chapter is essentially talking about the colonial gaze, how like all science fiction emerges in the context of industrialization of core economies, corresponding international contexts, what, like creating the market conditions, the class conditions, it created the right environment, the right material for the right environment. At a time where imperialism and colonialism is at its like most epic, it is navigating stories of such colonial and imperial tendencies, while they uphold colonial ideas, imperialist ideas of being and thinking in the world, they also contain within them the tensions that develop as a result of colonialism itself. So even those that were producing these texts within the context of imperialism and colonialism were writing texts that produced resistance to those very ideas. In the second chapter, Fantasies of Appropriation, it focuses mostly on lost races and discovered wealth. So begins with satire and quest romances in the imaginary voyage, moving into lost race fiction and the Civil War motif of lost race fiction, where like the outsider will come from a Western world and help to like resolve some kind of like Civil War conflict that's occurring in the lost race, which is depicted as like savage or primitive or primordial or proto-capitalist or so on and so forth. And eventually, the idea is that they can be folded in to notions of the West despite their non-Western primitivity. Like think about Atlantis, the Lost Empire. They were styled as like indigenous people, like a speculative indigenous peoples. They had their own cultures, their own customs, their own language, their own textiles, their own economies, their own commodities, their own transportation, technology, class stratification, so on and so forth. They have this like rich society, but it's considered proto-European society because it's still in relation to Greek myths and in relation to the colonial voyager or explorer. It produces within it the tensions of such colonialism and imperialism just through the relationships between Milo and what's her name, Kaya, something like that, or even like the relationships between Milo and like his team and stuff. But at the end of the day, it's still colonial expedition, right? That's what that is. And it's primarily for the purposes of like extracting some kind of like power source or wealth or something that the Atlanteans might have. And so this is, the idea of the princess, the idea of the treasure, the importance of the land. All of those are not just indicative of like a speculative indigeneity, but also how that idea of speculative indigeneity, this like future radical imagining of a society, is tied to a linear development of progress of Western civilization. It was first them, then now it's us. Even like the idea, I think that's like that might be the argument that some people might have for like people like Graham Hancock and stuff, who were like, well, we came from this like super civilized civilization, it's like super technologically advanced civilization that was like was like the pale people who go from culture to culture and like bring the knowledge and elevate them to some level. And so I think that's like in that in itself. I always wonder, why are people calling Graham Hancock racist? And I think it might be that the thing that Rieder is talking about is like the imagination of a radical temporality. Imagination is also deeply tied to speculative considerations of wish fulfillment. It's like what you want to be true, what evidence might show you. I don't know. Whatever. I'm not going to comment on it either way. I'm not in that field. It's just interesting to think about. Well, I'm not going to comment either way, to like judge either way, but I think that it's really interesting to think about. Okay, well, let's go ahead, keep reading. Another 25 on the clock. All right. Bro, what the fuck is going on? Why? Why are you so slow? Damn, bro, what the fuck? Library loads. This book loads. This one doesn't. Okay, I'll just wait till it loads up, I guess. I don't know. What the fuck? Oh, finally text. Wow, look at that. The fucking shit, dude. Dislocated subject is produced. Okay, another 5-minute break. It's going good. So yeah, I was explaining, I think at the last break, what he was doing in chapter 3, which is, God, this Zotero is working so slow. I think it's because of the OBS and stuff, but I'm not sure. It'll just like scroll and it'll show pages, but I have to go like really slow. So it's talking about how the imposition of the tensions between colonialism produce many different concerns when in the drama of through the drama of interpretation. Like when you read these particular texts, it's very clear how like if you read one of the things he brings. Hey man, I'm high. We're hanging out. It's all going in here. If it doesn't come out here during this, that's okay. This isn't my fucking defense. I'm just figuring things out right now. But in these drama of interpretation, he has like his structural framework for it is to give us a who, a what, a where, and a when. So no why, no how. The who is the dislocated subject. So what the main example that he uses, he vacillates between examples, like I said, in Poe's Facts in the Case of M. Valdemar, Edwin Abbott's Flatland. In Flatland, Samuel Butler's Erewhon, James DeMille's A Strange Manuscript Found in a Copper Cylinder. He has a lot of examples because there was a lot of shit written back then. But one of the things that he talks about is the dislocated subject. So like in Flatland, you have there's a place called Flatland, and then a particular character square starts to preach the gospel of three-dimensionality in Flatland and causes like all these concerns and stuff because they can't exist in the same space. And that kind of dislocated subject of science fiction, the subject who does not exactly have a place to belong to necessarily, a point of origin, is really interesting to think about, especially in relation to like Indian people in the diaspora, in globalization, where to locate like a concept of Indian identity. That's where I think the cosmopolitic, like the idea of having a cosmopolitical way of looking at the world, a cosmology that accounts for the the kind of like disjointed not placeability of the Indian identity, and thinking about that, Indian diaspora as dislocated subjects. This connects to Rieder's idea of generic borders and the permutations of analogy. So how does colonial discourse and how does the fact that there are all these generic possibilities, right? So the reason that science fiction works is because it, what does he say here? On the one hand, the entire story's satirical strategy depends on its reference to and avoidance of conventions of romantic adventure. On the other, it's poised between a straightforward satirical analogy to social conformity and internally self-consistent development of the science fiction premise of an entire culture being founded on a radically different perceptual basis from our own. So it's to do science fiction, you have to set it up as imaginative, impossible fact, right? It works in relation to its plausibility, which means it's intimately connected to ideas of what we think are real in the world, historically possible, and things that are unreal, radically different, not possible, impossible. Impossibility doesn't mean that it doesn't necessarily exist. It means it's hard to conceive of it within Western ideations of what constitutes society and civilization and civilized subjects and stuff, especially when you're looking at like Victorian stuff going into the early 20th century, because ideas of colonialism and imperialism were very much built into these science fiction texts, so that when you're reading when you're reading the time machine, and you get to the future, and you're like, wait, the entire idea of social Darwinism is like totally fucked, like, because the Morlocks are the civilized but degenerated population, and the Eloi are the human, the anthropomorphized but like while subjugated. I don't know, it's just weird. It's a weird tension that arises, right? Another thing that he brings us to is like the nature culture opposition and time travel, how time travel explores nature culture opposition because the isolation of the traveler and the instantaneous or discontinuous mode of travel heightens the usual difficulties of stranger in a strange land issues. So the stranger in strange land issues of like typical adventure becomes like even more complicated when you add in the science fiction element of time travel. And this gets really interesting because when you do that, you can like you're asking like what it means to be one of the things he talks about is like when you go to the future, or you're looking at different peoples when you're traveling through time, the future or the past. So you're wondering, like, were these human beings? And when you're saying that, you're meaning it as a rhetorical one, is what Rieder says, and it also poses itself reflexively against the future society, because the discontinuity between present and future makes it impossible not to ask whether this society can ever change into that one, the one they're looking at. One of the things he talked about was this particular text, Grant Allen's The British Barbarians, and how, like, in the text, this anthropologist from the future visits contemporary England to study taboos of primitive people who live there. And so he's, using the vocabulary of contemporary anthropology, the equation of indigenous cultures with the past, to produce straightforward satirical effect of transposing England into the place of the savage other. So here, it's like, on one hand, he's so the superiority of the cosmopolitan visitor from the future over the boorish Englishman of the present merely switches the roles Englishmen usually apply in the scheme of anthropological discourse, so that the novel's protest against the savagery of Allen's contemporaries leaves intact the ideology inhering in its framework of assumptions about civilization and progress. So it's like they're doing the thing, they're doing a progressive teleology, right, within the colonial imperial science fiction. But at the same time, there's also, as Rieder says here, subversive implications of Darwinian science, because when he ridicules the notion that anything remotely resembling humanity would ever be found on another planet, he also emphasizes the peculiar and surely unique combination of circumstances that produces any given species. So he's suggesting that this teleology applies to anthropocentric ways of looking at Earth, but not to other planets or whatever. And if we take that look at other planets and we apply it to otherness in the world today, what happens then? This is where he starts to talk about the issue of radical difference, and that's like the biggest concern, one of the biggest concerns of this emergent science fiction that kind of moves it forward into science fiction in the 20th and 21st century is, when you have the dislocated subject, when you have the difficult nature of analogizing experience of colonizer of Western to non-Western societies, when you're thinking about radical difference, you're gonna end up in places where, like, between two poles as representative of like the present day norm, and then the civil, like, you're looking at the present day norm and the way that, and like the whole civilized savage opposition, but you're also promoting a sense of like, I don't even know what the fuck I was saying, like promoting a sense of like universality as well. I don't know if that carries. I lost the train of thought there for a second. But one of the interesting quotes he has here is that cosmological uniformity would yield anything but comforting expectations about contact with the aliens, which is scientific discourse, ideology of progress, and colonial history that are basic fabrics of so many of these stories. Yeah, I don't know what the fuck. I think it was just talking about like radical difference is always the thing that is produced as a result of this. Because when you're engaging the problem of understanding the other, but you're talking about colonial history, ideology, and science, you're always at risk of exoticization. That tension that he's always talking about. It's like, look, are you trying to imagine a new future, like a different way or a different, radically different imagining, or are you just trying to exoticize and fetishize these things in order to wrap them into your own, into your own story? And this reminds me of one of the essays that I read last session was fetishism. One of them was who was talking about religious fetishism? Someone in Politics of Culture at Capital. Someone was talking about the utilization of objects in a religious sense to do like resistance against capitalism. And I think it was I think it was the idea, maybe it was Raymond Diletto talking about what was the term he used? Illicit societies or illicit groups, illicit associations. Like people who are fanatical, like very, very dangerously close to like colonial ideas, but are utilizing those ideas to perform resistance against that very coloniality, like bandits and stuff. It's like, look, dude, it's like I'm not a good guy, I'm not a bad guy, I'm just gonna do what the fuck, I'm gonna pursue what seems like naked self-interest, but in this anti-colonial revolutionary way, that once that anti-colonialism is achieved, it can actually just lead to further class stratification. So I don't know, it's weird. It's really interesting to think about. Like, if you have a person who's like a bandit person, they become like it's like some game. It's very like interesting. Like in Game of Thrones, I feel like this happened at some point. You have like a bandit person, God, I can't make that argument right now. I just can't. But I'm just thinking about like how Ileto was talking about, okay, these bandits, they were like, they were just doing, regular criminal shit, but their criminality was very useful in assisting anti-colonial nationalism. But once certain levels of anti-colonial nationalism are, like, once that is kind of like established, they don't become like they don't follow a teleology of progress as would befit like a Western story. Oh, they get like reformed or whatever, and now they're going to be part of like the new setup as like the newly proletariat, or like the new proletariat, the new individual. I think that Saldana Portillo talks about this with Politics of Culture in the Shadow of Capital in her essay talking about the Sandinistas, and how like the Sandinistas tried to do like land reform that actually produced further class stratification. And so like these ways of thinking about like radical, impossible, imagined worlds for emergent science fiction is like done so against the backdrop of colonialism and imperialism, the colonial and imperial project, and is like in parts supportive of that project, but also very much not in parts, is largely supportive of the project ontologically and epistemologically speaking, but it also like undercuts the very project itself by creating all these ways of thinking about radical difference and like self-other fucking jarring clashes. And this leads to chapter 4 where I'm at right now, Rieder talking about artificial humans and the construction of race, and like kind of drawing an analogy between the kind of the technologized figure of like the cyborg, and how that troubles issues of like what is human and what is not in science fiction, and this emergent science fiction he's talking about, and the talking about that in relation to race, and how like cyborgs and stuff are like racialized in their hybrid positionality with their relation to like what is human, and the way that they fuck up notions in our thinking of what's human and what's not, or what constitutes being, what's a soul, what is life, like so on and so forth, what is sentience, whatever, which is really interesting. And there's definitely a lot of talk about that. There's a person who graduated from my program, Dr. Leslie Fernandez, who wrote their dissertation on, I think it was called Techno-Orientalism. So talking about how, like, I don't really know what the specifics of it were, but just like off that, like how science fiction produces like reorientalized ways of reproduces orientalized ways of looking at, like, I guess Asian bodies or Asian identity as like technologized for the benefit of like maybe capitalism and stuff, which is super fucking, I mean, nailed that for shizzle. So that's really interesting to think about. I'm obviously taking like more breaks than normal because I'm just excited talking about things, I think, and that's good for me to look back at, like whenever I get ideas about stuff. Yeah, and you know, it's not always going to be the most like coherent thought or the most like brilliant thing. I doubt that I have even said any of that like so far in any of the times that I've ever spoken or thought in my life. But I'm going to keep doing it anyway, and the point of this is just to like have fun, you know? It's not supposed to be this like wildly serious occasion every time I do this, and that's how I keep it fun for myself, because otherwise it's just gonna get like way too fucking, I mean, it is serious, but I can't let it get that kind of serious, because otherwise I'm just gonna be like hard on myself like all the time. And what this is about repetition, volume. Same way that I got good at like I was never an athletic child, a young person, young adult, like into my late teenage. I didn't start working out until I was like 19 or something, and I feel like I just became like a reasonably fit individual. And that is, and I'm not like the fittest person in the world, but I feel very confident about my ability to like be in the world in a physical sense. And that really came from not like fucking making myself feel bad about stuff, but just like doing things and making it enjoyable, because this shit is just like this over and over and over and over and over again. And if I gotta do that lather, rinse, and repeat, I gotta really enjoy just like the movement of finger through hair, and like the squish of shampoo, and the water as it rinses the conditioner out of my head, and I feel that smooth, soft, silky, you know what I mean? Like that's the kind of like that kind of like zooming in on the fractal of the moments where I'm doing this stuff in order to expand my engagement with whatever it is that I'm reading. It's really what it's all about. Anyways, I'm done. Rant over. Let's go. Another 25 on the clock. And we'll probably go for like another like hour, maybe hour and a half. We'll see. Okay. I'm going to grab a granola bar and then I'm going to get right back to it. Did I turn this up? Oh, where was I in this? I thought I was way further back. Okay, 5-minute break. Oh, let's see. Yeah. So where did I leave off? We're on chapter 4. Talked about artificial humans, hybrids, cyborgs, the connection between like the cyborg figure, technologization of the other, and that being a form of racialization. Um, Definitely would be helpful for me to think about, if not reaching out to Dr. Fernandez about their dissertation, Techno-Orientalism, then certainly reading it in conjunction with some of the other um, former UCR, not former UCR, just like other former, I said former students that are current I would say they're current doctors. I mean, the ones I've looked up, I look up like dissertations on, like when I'm looking for stuff in Google Scholar or online, sometimes stuff will come up and it turns out to be like a dissertation of someone who, I haven't Googled every person whose article or dissertation that I find online, but the ones that I have, they've been employed as professors. But I don't want to assume that everybody who does a dissertation necessarily goes into academia. So I didn't. That's why I'm not saying, doctors, just like those former graduate students. Well, they're still doctors, no matter what. They're still doctors. So yeah, those doctors' dissertations. But yeah, dissertation. Their dissertation might be a useful place for me to consider expanding on what Rieder's talking about here. And the 5th chapter, which I think is the last chapter of the book, is talking about conflicts, world-ending conflicts with with science fiction, with the emergent science fiction that Rieder is talking about, its relationship to colonialism. One of its, a lot of what it's talking about is this far in the novel is interactions, like colonial and imperial interactions, as shown in terms of Western science fiction produced in Victorian society and basically like British American, from like the late 1800s into the early 1900s, and at this point, so it's mostly the colonies are coming into the space of the other. The 5th chapter is focused on what happens like where the world has scenarios. It's literally one of the texts that he's discussing, like what happens when we come into a conflict with, there was apparently like a lot of different literature being produced around the time that this science fiction was emerging, with like stories exploring the speculative considerations of what happens if England ends up going to war with like Afghanistan or Turkey or this country or that country, or what happens if they get invaded, so on and so forth. And this like paranoid narcissism being like evidenced in this emergent science fiction. It's interesting. Where did I even put it on for? Again, I got a minute left. Yeah, and that's where I'm at right now, and I'm gonna finish reading this chapter, and then I think after that I'm going to move into Isabelle Stengers' Cosmopolitics, and then go from there after I make my annotation for Rieder's text. I don't make my annotations like super lengthy, wordy necessarily, just like, what is like the average at right now? If I take like one that I read in the last so like I have some that are like 150 words, and then I will have others that are that's right, 188, so like closer to 200 words. So like that's like, for me, that's good. And with a lot of these texts, I'm like highlighting important quotes, making notes and stuff. Excuse me. There's a lot of them I like to do online. It's a lot easier than having physical books. I would love to have all the physical books, but it costs a lot of money, and it takes up a lot of space. And I don't know. And I just kind of enjoy like being able to like go wherever with whatever it is that I'm reading. Okay, cool. I think I'm going to give it. What time do I have to get? So I picked up some part-time gigs like around town. I'm working at a movie theater right now, and then I'm going to be at then I don't know, I'm taking like other interviews at places like around in the area, just like part-time stuff, like have some fun, meet some people, get out of this zone, have some extra bread in between the summers and before I start teaching summer courses and go into my third year, being on like fellowship and then employment and stuff. It's like employed with the university, like it's cool to have more or less like a full ride through school. Definitely super appreciative for it, but like gotta hustle to make sure that keep stacking that bread, you know what I mean? I guess when not necessarily in a capitalistic sense, just in a sense that like doing that stuff is good, and I'd rather do it when I don't necessarily have to than when I have to, like literally in dire situations. Just I have time, I have the energy and capacity for it, it's helpful, like why not, besides I've always wanted to work in a movie theater, right? Like I just had my first day like 2 days ago. It was cool, it was nice. All right, and yeah, today's just gonna be doing the thing, and it's gonna be nice. But before that, let's do some more reading, get in like another, maybe, let's see, I think I have time for maybe another half hour or something, maybe like another go around 25. Yeah, let's go. Okay, that's it for today. I forgot to put a timer on, but I'm pretty sure that was well over 25 minutes. Finished the reader text. The last chapter was interested in discussing these, like how the emergent science fiction of the Victorian era, late 1800s, early 1900s, also contained within it anxieties of the colonial and imperial anxieties about like potential invasion or retaliation by those that they had subjugated. The interesting ways that this kind of that the different instantiations of this kind of like war with the other, the reversal of the kind of how it evidences a kind of reversal of typical economic models of like the core and the periphery by turning the core into something that is the periphery of another society or culture, like in War of the Worlds. Overall, it was a really interesting book. He did a really engaging writing style, lots of stuff to draw from. And I was just looking up some other books that he has written that might be useful for me to check out. Honestly, it's like, that's what's so weird about this dissertation writing stuff, is that like there's pretty much going to be no end to the amount of stuff that I'm going to want to read, the amount of things that are going to be like constantly popping up for me to read, but just got to read what's on my list right now, keep going, keep working it out. Eventually the idea will coalesce and develop itself. Going to, I guess I'm going to write down my annotation. At the end of these, I just don't want to do anything but stop looking at a computer. But energized to come back again the next day always. So I'm going to go to my beer among the knowledge. There you go, Colonialism and the Emergence of Science Fiction. And I am just going to write that really quick. And then I'm going to end the stream, and then I'm going to go from there. All right, that's it. We're done.